We have a great presentation today for Law Day 2013. Before I begin, I'd like to extend a special thanks to Judge Gilbert Smith for helping with the Law Day Committee. I'd also like to thank Magistrate Malucci, Susan Malucci, for helping with the committee, and Andrea Johnson, who's here to my left. The theme of Law Day this year is realizing the dream, equality for all. And that theme comes from America. That theme is America. The promise of equality of all under the law is America. The 2013 is 150 years since the Emancipation Proclamation. And it's also the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King, 50 years ago, was recognizing the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. So realizing the dream, equality for all, is the theme of Law Day. And at this time, I'll turn it over to the moderators of the panel.
Andrea Johnson and Judge Malucci.
Well, I'm excited to introduce our panelists this afternoon. We have a great group of experts, and so before we get into the question and answer portion with Magistrate Malucci, I do want to introduce them. We have Kinsey Neeson. She received her Master of Arts degree in criminal justice with honors from Grand Valley University. After graduate school, she was published in the Southwest Journal of Criminal Justice. She has a diverse background working with nonprofits, and she has worked in crisis shelters and has been a direct care and intake counselor for at-risk youth. She is currently the Director of Operations and Strategic Development at Selah Freedom. For those who do not know, Selah Freedom is a nonprofit organization that works directly with victims of sex trafficking. And her particular duties, she is somewhat the arm to the law enforcement with Selah. She's certified with the Florida Crime Prevention Training Institute for Human Trafficking, and she often partners with the Sarasota and Bradenton police departments, being the first point of contact for victims who are sexually exploited. She facilitates the Selah Freedom Sex Trade Support Group. She provides training on human trafficking to local law enforcement and serves on the Sarasota Human Trafficking Task Force. Next, we have Major Connie Shingledecker. She graduated summa cum laude from St. Leo College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Administration and a minor in Criminology. She graduated from the FBI National Academy, 185th session in Quantico, Virginia. She is a 35-year veteran law enforcement officer with the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, and she began her career in 1977. Currently, she is the Investigative Bureau Chief over Criminal Investigations, Child Protective Investigations, Narcotics as well. She's very active in the community, and she too speaks on training and various issues involving domestic violence, sexual and physical child abuse, death investigations, stress recognition, ethics and courtesy, sudden unexplained infant death, crime scene reenactment and reconstruction, and juvenile delinquency. We also have, to her right, Luz Corcuera. She is certified clinical therapist with a Master of Arts degree in pastoral ministry. She is the program director of Healthy Start Coalition of Manatee County. It's a local agency that provides services to women and infants, and she became involved in human trafficking education and awareness in 2004 when she had actually participated with a woman who was involved in one of their programs and had a very painful story from this experience. And so she has tremendous expertise in this area. And she has helped organize several community human trafficking education trainings and advocates on behalf of the victims. And finally, we have Dawn Buff with us this afternoon. She grew up in Miami. She is the daughter of a cop and a teacher. She obtained her undergraduate degree from Florida State University in 1992 and her JD from Stetson in 1995. She is an assistant state attorney in the 12th Judicial Circuit. She has been that since 1995. She prosecutes crimes against children, including Jimmy Rice cases. She's done that from January 2006 through February of 2013. Currently, she is a felony division chief and the chief of the sex crimes division in Manatee County, and she has tried over 185 jury trials. She has taught classes. She has lectured throughout the circuit and state. She has community involvement with this issue. One of the organizations she serves on the board of is PAWS, Pet Advocates Working in Sarasota. It is a program that seeks to provide care for child abuse victims through four-legged friends and through their pets. And she is presently the law enforcement chair of the Sarasota Human Trafficking Task Force. So would you please join me in welcoming this wonderful group of panelists. And at this point in the program, Susan Malucci is going to start the question and answer format where we present questions to the panelists and they respond.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start with Dawn. Dawn, what does human trafficking mean, and how would it be defined in Florida statutes?
Can everyone hear me if I talk like this? Apparently they want the mic.
Yep, we do.
That's all right.
Put this back up here.
There we go. Human trafficking in the state of Florida is basically exploiting any person for another purpose. A lot of times people think that it may just be sex trafficking, and that's a lot of what you've heard this afternoon, but it includes domestic servitude. It includes places of employment where if you go to a specific establishment and there isn't a single person who speaks any English and they all seem to come all at once, and they may be kept there and forced to work to pay off transportation to the United States. They may have their passports taken. They may have any documentation taken, IDs taken, so it can happen in the workforce. It can be somebody who's sent from another country here to work as a maid or as a nanny. It could be prostitution as adults. It could be prostitution as children. So anytime one person is exploiting another person for a gain, that falls under human trafficking.
And stay there.
Okay.
When was it added as a crime?
Okay. This particular definition, and the most comprehensive definition we've had thus far, began in July of 2012. That there was some definition of human trafficking before then, but as far as what we have now, which is way more comprehensive than what we had before, it took effect July of 2012.
Thank you, Dawn. I'd like to ask Luz Coqueta to come up. I have a few questions for her. Luz, who do you think is most likely to be a victim of human trafficking?
Anyone could be a victim of human trafficking. When I got involved in this issue in 2004, we were under the assumption that it was a domestic violence case. However, we had to educate ourselves, educate our workers, and educate the community because it was a case of human trafficking. Anybody who is vulnerable, anyone who wants to improve her or his life, someone who wants to have a job, someone who is promised a good life and to fulfill the American dream, which in fact is the dream of any person who wants to have a dignified life and be able to provide for his or her family. Children who run away are very susceptible to be lured into performing activities not appropriate for their age and also held captive against their will. One of the first cases that I learned about was the Florida coalition, the Immokalee, Florida Coalition for Farm Workers, where they discovered that there were many farm workers who were held against their will, and they were working long hours, underpaid. And just don't have to be people who are undocumented. Some people have legal documents, they have visas to come into the United States and can be held as victims of human trafficking. Also, it happens to nationals. What really overwhelmed me is to know that Florida is the third state that holds the highest cases of human trafficking besides California and DC. So something must be happening in Florida that we are not noticing or not doing very much. I also saw the amount of resources that are now available for victims and for professionals who need to be trained. And there are simple questions that we can ask to be able to determine whether someone is a victim or not. I am sure that in this room there are so many of you who come across to victims not knowing, and the ER rooms, and also Healthy Start, the organization that I work for, we have a chance to meet many families and women, and then by exploring and asking those questions about if they know their address very well, if someone is paying them and how much they make, in a very casual conversation, we could probably uncover many of these cases. The recent cases that I'm aware of is last year in Pinellas County, one of the Healthy Start workers was putting two and two together. She realized that there were many women, and they were from Egypt, and they had the same address. So this worker started thinking about how odd it was to have so many women who were pregnant and who were given the same address. So she took herself, she gave herself the role of investigator, which we always are warned by the sheriff's office, don't do that, call us. She went to the house and she started observing so many people coming in and going out, men and women. So finally, the case was reported, and it turned out that these women were having babies against their will, and the babies were being given up for adoption. And right now, this case is under the FBI investigation. And I don't really want to hack the microphone, Susan, so if you want to move to...
Yeah. We have another question, and we'll move on to Major Shingledecker. Major Shingledecker, if you'll come up and answer, why is the crime so difficult to detect and to prosecute?
Good afternoon. Human trafficking has really taken on, especially with the change in the statute in 2012, has really taken on a different face. You just actually heard Luz talk about a lot of the folks that might come into this country, perhaps illegally, and that was the face of human trafficking probably in 2002, as best we knew it. The face of human trafficking now are young teenage girls that are Americans, that are being prostituted by gang members, by thugs who realize, hey, it's a lot more profitable than selling drugs and getting caught. Now we can take these girls and we can threaten them, coerce them. Most of them are underage, and we can control them very easily, and it's all profitable. They've run away, they're throwaways, many of them are foster children. So the face of human trafficking has definitely changed, and if you look at the newspapers and you look at what's happening in these larger cities, it's really egregious. There are young girls that are being threatened and coerced. They may be high school students, and when this information comes out, it's really difficult to deal with these victims because they don't look like your average victim. Many of them are involved in drugs, and they don't necessarily see themselves as a victim. They don't want to cooperate with law enforcement. They're very streetwise. They've been on the streets for quite some time. and it may take a very, very long time before they feel like they want to come forward and do anything about it. So I just challenge you. I know that there's some judges in the room, and I think we've talked at some other meetings in regards to this issue with these young people. How do you contain them to get them off the drugs, to get them in a position where we can actually do something to help them? You know, and I know that that we're going to have someone else come up and talk about the wraparound services, because law enforcement is just one piece. I used to think years ago putting people in jail would solve a lot of, you know, pretty much solve everything. You just put somebody in jail, you know, you can walk around with a smile on your face and be happy about that, right? We were talking earlier, why are you smiling so much? But the bottom line here is that's just one aspect of what really happens in the real world. I mean, that's just one piece. So now you've got victims that may not be supported. You've got families that are, you know, floundering, and these young people who don't necessarily see themselves as a victim, who may not feel that they can have anyone that's going to support them, and they've got a long road to go down to get themselves back to where they feel like an actual human being again and can be integrated back into society. So, you know, given that law enforcement is just one small piece, it's going to take the court systems, it's going to take some really unique services, and we may have to find some way where we can actually contain them without them running away, running back out onto the street, getting back into the drug situation to where we can actually help them. And that's going to be our most difficult situation, is the victim that doesn't necessarily want to cooperate, won't be there to move forward in a trial setting, won't be there to testify, and without them we may not have a case. So that's the huge piece that I see us having right now. And I know that there's going to be someone else that's going to come up and talk about those wraparound services and how important that they are.
Thank you, Connie. Question now for Kinsey. Kinsey, who do you think is most likely to come in contact with a human trafficking victim?
I think that a lot of people could come in contact. It's really important. We try to educate anyone that will listen to us. So we talk to other nonprofits, legal, law enforcement, people that work in the jails. But honestly, anyone can come in contact. Your neighbors could be a part of it. So it's so important that we as a community start to really understand this problem. I think right now, as Shingledecker was saying, that right now a lot of our domestic cases or a lot of human trafficking that we're seeing is coming through prostitutes, and so they're ending up in the jail. So it's really important that we're educating the jail system on what these victims and survivors look like so that they can get the healing and restoration that's happening in the jails.
And so you mentioned law enforcement, but who else do you think needs training in this area about human trafficking and how to recognize it?
A big place that we think needs training is education, so school systems. The children can really be a huge part of advocating of what's going on with people in the schools, specifically delinquents, so anyone going to an alternative school. We believe that any touch point we can get into in the community needs training. So it's kind of a hard question to answer because we don't say no to anyone that wants training. If someone calls us and says, my church wants training, we go. If someone says, I work for a nonprofit or a club or anyone that wants training, we will give training to, because we believe that could be an open door for a group seeing human trafficking.
I'd like to comment on the issue. Okay, let's just break it down. Landlords, code enforcement officers, property managers, social service workers. We train our child protective specialists, people that are going to be out there in the community, domestic violence counselors. The very first case that I'm aware of in the state of Florida came out from a domestic violence counselor that was that spoke Spanish and was able to communicate with a young girl in a home setting that she thought looked unusual. The situation looked unusual, and the domestic violence incident occurred because this young girl that had been brought over from Guatemala was being held at that residence. She didn't have any way to leave, and she was she was forced to perform labor at the house, and then he would rape the young girl at night. Well, the wife got a little upset about that, and that's what caused the domestic violence incident, and he got arrested. So when the domestic violence counselor came out to the house, she noticed the young girl, spoke to the young girl in Spanish, and built a relationship with her and then found out that she was being trafficked and that she was being held there. And do you know what she was most fearful of? He had cast a spell on her. And she believed that. He had a lock of her hair, some material, a little doll, and he kept it in a box. And he told her that he had cast a spell on her and that she was not going to be able to leave and that her family would be killed and other things. But she really believed that she could not leave because that spell had been cast. So this very intuitive domestic violence counselor broke the spell. She did something and she said, I have broken the spell and now you can leave. So, I mean, when we talk about who needs to be trained, there are so many people that we could reach out to within our own community and train them, because there could be nail technicians, there could be folks at massage parlors, there could be food industry people, because in Pinellas County there's been a nail industry and a food industry that have had human trafficking occurring, just one county away. So we know that it's out there. We just all need to be aware. When things don't look right, report them, and we do need to educate ourselves.
Stay here for a minute. I have one other question for you. What kind of training, can you just explain a little bit about the training you've received, and then Kinsey, if you can also do that, and we'll have the other two panels as well.
You know, it doesn't really take a lot of training. So when I just put something out to my detectives, I have roughly 200 folks that I supervise in the 3 different bureaus that work for me. And I've made it mandatory that every one of my detectives receives at least a 1-day training in human trafficking, because let's face it, narcotics and vice, they handle the prostitution, they handle the drug situation. They're the most likely to come into contact with in the area of prostitution. They're the most likely to come into contact. I want them to know what it is when they see it. Not just to so much focus on the issue that they're a prostitute, but that somebody could be humanly trafficking them. Our Crimes Against Children's Unit, another huge area where those folks need to be trained, and they have been, and they're on those task forces. So that's, it doesn't take a lot, and those folks come in, and there are grants that can come in and provide that level of training, 1-day training, and get that information out. There's some online training that's pretty good too. So.
I personally go to any training I can find. So a huge one that I thought was probably one of the best ones I've went to is with the Florida Crime Prevention. And he does a lot of training specifically on Florida, so how it happens here. Laws is a big thing to learn so that you know what services are actually there for the victim and survivors. There's a lot of, like she said, online trainings that you can do. There's lots of ministries that have really good trainings all over Florida, Tampa, Fort Myers, so not that far away where you can get linked to trainings. And a lot of people will travel, so if you have a group or of you that want training, they will travel to you to give you that training. So.
I just want to mention that also along the training and the many resources available, it's important to look at the cultural aspect of the person, of the victim. In the Latino culture, it's not uncommon to see young women who are getting married or living together with men that are much older than them. And I know that when they come to the States, that's an issue, and they can, if the minor is under 18, you know, they can go to jail. But Jimmy, I think you are aware of this. In Mexico, for instance, that's very common, that a young woman could be married to a man who is 20 years older than her, and the man doesn't go to jail. However, there are some other cultural aspects to the victim. There was a case where a young woman disclosed to us that she was trying to cross the border, and she was so afraid to be raped by all those men. And so she went to the man who seemed the nicest and the kindest and supportive to her. She didn't know that he was going to turn out to be, later on, the person that controlled her life, that found the customers for her, that asked her to do a lot of things that she didn't want to do. And she thought that she was in love with him, because these young women sometimes are very sheltered where they come from. And they think they are going to be working here in the States, and they are going to be able to send money to their family. So the family plays a very important role, and many times the oppressors or the abusers or the traffickers hold them in captivity by threatening them that they are going to kill their families and they are going to go after their relatives in certain places. So understanding the culture of the victim is also very important.
Thank you. And Don Buff.
One of the first trainings I went to was through Sail of Freedom, and they had a movie. They had somebody come in. I've done some training through Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association. Went to task force meeting with the Fort Myers, Southwest Florida Human Trafficking Task Force down there, and there's just so much. We are honestly at the tip of the iceberg, and there are so many people who want to do the training, who do the trainings in the schools and different places, and that's what we're trying to get going as far as our task force that's out of Sarasota, but it's to cover this area as well. We just happen to meet in Sarasota. And then that's what our plan is to bring some additional training here, make sure we get it into the academies, make sure that we get it into the schools. And as far as who needs that training, I'm going to add on to it even more. The FP&L lineman, the cable guy who goes into the house and he sees something, because everybody going to let the cable guy in their house, right? You know, everybody wants their cable, so nobody's going to keep him out. Even their narcotics that aren't dealing with vice. In Northport, we've had tons of grow houses, and you've got these houses that are in the middle of nowhere, especially in Northport, with no infrastructure, so that nobody's paying attention to the neighbor next door or whatever, and you've got some person there that their whole job is to maintain this grow house to grow. For those of you who don't know, grow house means marijuana. Is to keep the marijuana growing. Oh, yeah. Got it, Rob? So good. And so that their whole job is to stay there. Now, they're not the ones making the money off of it. They're just plopped over there by somebody else to stay there. And they're not going outside. They're not putting the trash out. They're not having contact with neighbors. And then what will happen is law enforcement goes in and dismantles the grow house, and that's the patsies that's there and gets stacked with a charge, although all he's doing is just showing up and making sure the water gets turned on. And so it's happening in those places too. And a detective I know from Sarasota, that's where he started seeing it, and so I've involved him in our task force. So it could be the hairdressers. Those are great people to know about domestic violence too, but they're great people because who doesn't talk to their hairdresser, ladies? Right? Man, I'm sure you're talking to your hairdresser all the time, right? Right? But those are the people who need to know these things, is anyone who has contact with humans. Other humans. Those are the people.
And while you're up here, Dawn, what kind of cases have been prosecuted here in human trafficking?
Well, keeping in mind that the new statute just came into effect in July of 2012, a few of the things that we've had may not have been classified as human trafficking under the old statute. They may have been classified more as deriving proceeds from prostitution, and I know we have a couple of those cases pending right now. I had a case in Sarasota where there was a young girl who was some prostituting herself out, but also providing proceeds to another female, and we did prosecute the two females and many of the Johns who had engaged, but it wasn't classified as human trafficking yet. They were still prosecuted, for example, some of the males for sexual activities with a person under the sexual activities by a person over 24 with somebody under the age of 17, which is still a second-degree felony. I think that we'll start getting more of those as people become aware of what they're seeing and people begin reporting it, but it's like domestic cases. Unless it gets reported and comes to you, you don't even have that to report, to prosecute. And when you think about in terms of the prostitution, again, people may not see themselves as victims, and they may not want to turn around and dime out their pimp, because that's really what you're going to need to get those cases, to prosecute those cases. Is you need a child or an adult who's coming in and saying, yes, I'm going out and committing these acts, therefore confessing to a crime, and then the money goes to this person. So you need that kind of ladder that goes up, and that's kind of hard. They're distrustful of law enforcement. They're distrustful of us. So it's really hard to make that turn, just as it is for us with some of the domestic cases, for them to make that turn, even if they're initially cooperative. You've got to continue to make those relations, which I was talking with Kinsey from SELA about, And she said one of the main things that they're trying to do now is build relationships with the brothels, with the prostitutes, to make sure that that she can gain their trust so we can get them to work with law enforcement and then in turn work with us.
Thank you, Dawn. Kinsey, just to wrap it up with you, I have another question or two. What resources are available to victims, and do you think there's something in Manatee County that we don't have that we might have as far as resources goes?
There's not a lot of resources specifically for a human trafficking survivor. We are the only nonprofit that in our mission statement says we're working with these sex trafficking survivors. So, but in saying that, there are a lot of domestic shelters, things like that, that also are working with this. So I guess the biggest thing is connecting and knowing what services are actually here. So working on the Sarasota Task Force and different groups in Manatee, we try to compile what resources are here that we don't know about, that have training, that deal with these survivors. Also, knowing the laws, because that's what we're working with Bradenton Police right now, is knowing when we get a prostitute that's actually a survivor or a victim of human trafficking, knowing that by law you can actually defer her to services versus arresting her and sending her straight to jail. So working again on education so that we're actually using the services that are out there. I do believe we could use a lot more services. The biggest things would be beds. Like we talked about earlier, this is a dynamic group of people. So a lot of times what you have is someone that has been manipulated so much in their mind, the first thing they're going to do is run straight back to that pimp because they're afraid for their life. So knowing that we need to have a lot more secure, lockdown, safe houses that we can actually send these women or men to, because without that, they're going to run straight back to their jail. And then the places that do have beds aren't equipped to hold these women. So we're seeing a lot of turnover where the women are running back to the pimps.
Thank you. Major Shingledecker, do you want to kind of close it out for us?
Certainly. And as we've been talking about this and understanding the problem in our community, we're sort of at its stage of infancy in developing our task force, which is partnering with both Sarasota and Manatee County. And part of that is, first of all, understanding what is the issue and then looking at what resources do we have. So we have folks that are in place now to start working on what we need to build infrastructure-wise within our community. I think we have a lot of resources here in Manatee County. We know we have the runaway shelter. We know we have Salvation Army. We know we have bed space. We just need to coordinate and get folks to understanding what the dynamics are. But as I mentioned earlier, these victims don't necessarily want to cooperate. And so they need psychological assistance. They need those wraparound services. And what I think I'm hearing folks say is we need some form of secure detention for them. And whether or not we can get them into that circumstance or not to keep them from running is going to be key. But we have we're beginning this. We've got some folks here today. Some of my detectives that are here today are on those task forces, and we will be working and moving forward in the future on developing more structure here within Manatee County for our resources.
Thank you. Well, now we're going to move on for 5 or 10 minutes to the last part of this program. We put fact patterns on everybody's tables, and I hope that you've had a chance as a group, your table, to read them. And we thought the best way to kind of bring this home is to put you in a situation where you're confronted with maybe a fact pattern and might have some questions for our panel about them. So is there anyone that has a question? If you'll go to the microphone, please, Judge Lakin.
It's just really a comment. This is on or not, but I'm on an international committee. Hold on a second. It's not working. All right, this committee I'm on with the American Bar Association is very active in international matters involving human trafficking, and frankly, countries in Western Europe like France and Germany and the UK are well ahead of us. And the problem you're seeing is enforcement. It's great domestically when you have gang members of people you can prosecute that are American citizens. It's a very different situation, such as what they were seeing in South Florida, where you have gangs from Russia and Eastern European gangs coming to South Florida running nightclubs, where they would bring prostitutes in to basically engage in fraud, by charging $30,000 to someone who sits there at the nightclub for the night, okay? That was all human trafficking based, and the enforcement mechanism from the FBI and other state and federal law enforcement agencies, we have an extremely difficult time internationally to try to get the ringleaders through Interpol and other agencies. Now, the American Bar Association has taken big steps. I'm going to be in a conference in London and Dublin in October where we're talking about these issues. And we can learn from our counterparts in Europe, especially Western Europe, about how to get ahead of this. So we can use the courts, in my role, as what I call a temporary Band-Aid. You can use incarcerative measures all day long. Doesn't necessarily solve the issues. It may be a temporary Band-Aid, maybe, make you smile temporarily. But in the long run, this is really an international issue. And if you look at the United Nations, there's very few treaties really involving this that have more than maybe 100 countries that are signature countries to the treaty.
Just to comment briefly on that, the FBI does work and I'm sure that they were probably involved in those cases down in the Miami area, and what he's talking about was in the newspaper not too long ago, and I also heard it on the radio. But yeah, it's important to involve the feds, because then they are going to be our ticket into getting the resources on a much higher level when you're dealing with folks that are coming out of the country. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. That's fascinating work, and we hope to hear from you again on that. Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. It was all very insightful. I had a question for you. Both the fact patterns kind of lay out coerciveness, and it's based on withholding money or threats to the family. Are there, if an attorney or anyone in the community has a position where they come into contact with someone who fits one of these fact patterns, what's the best way, just straight ahead, to get them the resources? Is it to go through directly to the police department? Are they going to, obviously you said they're going to have concerns there about some of them going directly to the police. Is it better to go through an agency? If you guys could speak on that.
We give out our number for anyone that sees something like that. The white one that you're reading is exactly typical of what we see on a daily basis. So we would say directly to call Sail of Freedom. We're linked with lots of human trafficking organizations to make sure we would get that person to treatment that they need, whether that means they need to get out of the state or whatever that means to get that person safe. So we would be equipped to take that call.
And I do think that when you're thinking about the victim, you're thinking about their safety first, and so making sure that that person is in a safe circumstance. And then I think you need to get law enforcement involved to see what exactly, because we need to be gathering evidence. And if that's just one person, what if there are others that are still being held? You can just think about those 3 young girls that were, at that person's house for 10 years, and one got out. And did they leave the other 2 behind? No. I mean, somebody hopefully is going back in and finding if there are other, people that are at risk. You do want to involve law enforcement. And jurisdictionally, that's going to be the issue. Whose jurisdiction is it? Do we need to involve the feds? Do we need to get somebody involved at a higher level? So getting that person safe, and then getting someone, if they don't speak the language. A case recently in Tampa, they had to actually take these young girls that were in a massage parlor, human trafficking circumstance, to MacDill Air Force Base, and they were Korean. And so now they were being interviewed by somebody that could speak their language. So that's going to be key, getting them safe, getting the information, and bringing law enforcement into play so that we can, because we definitely want to take care of the bad guy. So.
I think that's key too with community policing and making sure we're all connected, so that we can make sure every touch point is being met, making sure that if there are other women out there, that we're making sure that each point is being contacted so that it can be resolved and not just a Band-Aid like you were discussing earlier.
I think it's also very important to make sure that someone who is connected with not only with law enforcement, but someone from the legal office, maybe Don can talk about it, because in order to help undocumented people who are victims of human trafficking, they need to be certified as victims. And so we've learned over the years, working specifically with Gulf Coast Legal, that we needed to be able to provide some facts so that they could certify the victims, and maybe Don can expand on it. The T visa? The UNT visa.
what we're talking about is, the first thing I want to say is it's good for them, for law enforcement to be informed, even if that victim doesn't go forward. Sometimes, and it happens in child sex cases too, that aren't human trafficking, that you find out about one and that for some reason you can't go forward on that one, but then another one comes up and then another one comes up, and it gives us a place to start. Even if that one victim doesn't, it gives us a place to start for investigative purposes. And as far as, and other things that we can provide, if you do have a human trafficking victim who is not legally in the United States, or their family isn't legally in the United States, there are visa programs that Gulf Coast Legal Services, if there's anyone there here from there, has been phenomenal in helping, because that is a tremendous, I tried to do the U visa stuff for a victim's family, and I'd spent like 80 hours, and I consider myself reasonably intelligent, still had no clue what I was doing, and they've been very helpful to get them so that they can stay in this country legally, so that their families can stay in this country legally, and we can help them on their way of getting out of that. So, you know, you can report it. I mean, maybe they don't want it reported, they may say that, but at least it gives us a starting place. Even if we know about it and they choose not to go forward, that's another issue, but at least it's a starting point for, because the biggest point of this is taking it out of the darkness and into the light for people to know what's going on. And it's once you shed the light on it that we can actually start to do something about it. Like I said, the tip of the iceberg, you just see the tip of the iceberg and all the rest is down below. So when you keep taking those layers away and you start seeing more of it, then more of us know it's there and more of us can do something about it.
I'm just going to make one more comment about that. The U and T visas do require law enforcement investigation, and so we actually have a person in our agency that does confirm that there is a criminal investigation moving forward. Now, that we may not have enough evidence to get it to the state attorney's office, but we do verify that we're working with that victim on that case as well. But if I would just encourage you all to educate yourselves. You can go online and have your family members be educated, because it's interesting to know that there are nail places and food industries, and how many of us women get our nails done? You know, how many of your wives get their nails done? And so just being aware, I know you guys don't get your nails done. Every now and then, right? Okay. So, but being aware of what's going on around and communicating with those folks, and just trying to, when you recognize and see something that's really unusual, I think those are really going to be huge pieces. What you've seen today is just examples, but there are so many different scenarios that we could be looking at. So it's just awareness and reporting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, everyone.
A special thanks to our panel and our moderators. That'll conclude our Law Day presentation. Just a quick couple of announcements before we adjourn. Our next meeting, the annual meeting's on June 26th. We don't have a meeting in July, and at the next meeting we'll have the installation and election of officers and the presentation of community service awards. Any other announcements out there? We stand adjourned then.